So last time we wrote four new functions in the NFT market contract. Now it's time to test all of them. So let's go to the index.ts test file. Um, First of all, we want to be able to use the same contract in all of our tests. So we want to be able to deploy it once and use it every time. So to do that, we're gonna wrap the entire thing in another describe function. Let's declare an NFT market variable of type contract, and we want to deploy the contract before all the tests start, and then assign it to the NFT market variable. So to do that, we can use the before function. So this function takes a callback that will be executed once before running the tests. So we can basically copy past these lines. This should be async, and instead of creating a new variable, let's just assign the result to this variable here, and let's wait for it to be deployed. And let's move this describe inside the outer describe, and everything should be working the same. Let's check npx hardhat run test. Yep, everything is working, and let's also delete these comments here. We don't need them anymore. So let's start testing the listNFT function. So describe list NFT. So the first test should test this required statement. So we're gonna send a 0 price, and we should expect the transaction to be reverted with this error message. So it should revert if price is 0. So first we need to create a new NFT. So we're gonna basically do the same thing we did here, and I don't want to copy paste these lines over and over, so I'm just gonna create a function for it. So let's do const create an NFT. Um, let's move these lines here, and it's basically it should take a token URI in the parameters. So we're gonna create an NFT and return that NFT ID. So we can do here const token ID equals wait create NFT. Pass it in the token URI. So let's do the same here. Const token ID equals await create NFT with whatever or let's do const token URI equals some token URI and pass the token URI here. So let's call the less NFT function now. So await or const transaction equals NFT market dot list NFT. So it takes a token ID and the price. So token ID is going to be token ID, the price. So we are testing this require statement. So let's pass in a 0 price, and we can do expect transaction to be reverted with, and let's copy this error message, and let's add an await statement here. Let's run the test. Great. Um, so if the price is 0, the transaction will be reverted with this error message. So this is how you can test if a transaction is reverted or not. Um, and don't forget to add the await to the expect, otherwise it's not going to work. So the next thing we want to test is that the function should revert if the one who's calling it is not the owner of the token. So to do that, let's create another test. Should revert if not called by the owner. So let's create another NFT here. So in previous videos, I mentioned that if we don't specify which signer should call a contract function, the first signer will be used. So here, if we remember, we can get the signers array using await ethers.getSigners, and we can grab the first signer address using this line here. So in all the functions up until now, the first signer is the one who's being used by default. So now we want to call the listNFT with another signer who does not own this token, right? So when we call create NFT, um, we don't specify which signer will call the function. So the first signer will be used here, and then we want to use the second signer to call it listNFT, and it should revert because the second signer does not own this token. The first signer does. So instead of doing NFT market.list NFT, we can do NFT market.connect and then specify signer here. So instead of grabbing the signers like this every time, let's go ahead and just do it one time here. So let signers, so what's the type of this? Signer with address. So signer with address. And we can do signers equals await ethers dot get signers, and we can use the signers here, and we can reuse them here too. So let's connect the second signer, and let's call the listNFT function using with that signer address, and we should expect that the transaction will revert. But I don't know which error message will be reverted with, so let's just run the test and see. Oh, oops. The price should not be equal to 0 here, otherwise it's going to be the same test as the one before it. So it was reverted, and the error message is this one. So if we just copy, paste it here, rerun the test, it should work. So the test says approved caller is not owner nor approved for all. So this line was the line responsible for reverting the function. Now there's only one test left, and we should test that the NFT will be listed for sale if all the requirements are met. So the price should not be 0, and the caller should own the token. So let's just copy past this. It should list the token for sale if all requirements are met. So we're gonna create a new token. We're gonna call the list NFT with the first signer, the same signer that created the token. We're gonna use the token ID and the price that is not 0, and this should not revert. So let's do const receipt equals await transaction dot wait. We should await this too. And let's console.log the receipt and see how it looks. So this is the receipt object, and we're interested in the events array. So we have one approval event, another approval event, and a transfer event, and an NFT transfer. Um, I'm not sure why there are two approvals. Let's check the code actually. So the approve function um calls the underscore approve, which emits an approval. So this is the first approval event, and then the transfer from calls the underscore transfer, which also calls approve, which emits another approval. So thinking about it, this approve is kind of redundant. We don't need it, so we can just delete it here because the one who's transferring the token is the message sender, is the owner of the token, and it's not the contract who's transferring it. It's the owner who transfers it. So this also should revert if the caller is does not own the token. Let's run the test again and see. The should revert if not called by the owner fails, but it still reverts, but it's just a different error. Transfer caller is not owner nor approved. So if we can just copy this and change the error message here. All the tests should be passing, and we only have one approval event. That approve function was redundant, and it's good that we catch that because it's always better when there's less code. So the more code you add to your functions, the more expensive they will be to execute. Let's go back to our events array, and we're only interested in the transfer event. So let's grab the arguments of that event. So it's at index 2. So let's do const args equals receipt dot events at index 2 dot args console dot log args. Let's see how they look like. So it's an object with token ID, to token URI, and price. So these parameters here. So let's assert some stuff. First, the token ID should be equal to this token ID. So let's do expect token ID or args.token ID to be equal or to equal token ID. So expect args.to to equal NFT Market.address. The third assertion is that the token URI should be an empty string. So expect args.token URI to equal empty string. And the last assertion is that the price should equal to the price we sent here. So we can store this in a variable, const price equals 123. Use the variable here and also use it here. So args.price to equal price. So this is all we need to check for in order to test if the function executes correctly. So yeah, all the tests are passing, so everything is working as expected. So we actually modified the create NFT function to emit another transfer NFT transfer event. So let's check for that too. So let's change this to say should create an NFT with the correct owner and token URI. So we actually need the receipt object here, so we're not going to use the create NFT function. Let's just bring this code back here. Um, So transaction, blah, 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 token ID. So we asserted that the newly created NFT token URI is the same one sent to the create NFT function. That's good. The second check is that the owner of the token is the one who called the function. That's also good. Now we should check for the NFT transfer event. So assert that NFT transfer event has the correct arguments. So let's also cancel that log uh, receipt.events to see how it looks like here. So 0, then 1. So it's at index 1. So let's grab it. Const args equals receipt.event events at index 1 args console.log. We don't need to cancel that. We just did it here. So we can just assert. So expect that args dot to equal token ID. Expect args dot to equal owner address, or current address is the same. So expect args dot token URI to equal token URI, and the price here should be 0. So expect args dot price to equal 0. Yep, all the tests are still passing, so that's a good sign. So let's continue testing our smart contract. The next function in the list is the buyNFT function. The first thing we need to test is that the function reverts if the NFT is not listed for sale. So this covers both cases, the case where the NFT exists but is not listed for sale, and the case where the NFT does not even exist. So let's go ahead and start writing tests for it. Let's add the describe by NFT. So it should revert if token or if NFT is not listed for sale. So let's do transaction equals await, or just NFT market dot buy NFT, and it takes a token ID. So we are going to pass in a token ID that does not exist. So let's do 9999, and we should expect transaction to be reverted with this error message. Let's run the test. Great. The next test is that the function should revert if the amount of way sent with the transaction is not equal to the price of the NFT. So to do that, we first need to list an NFT with a certain price and then um, try to buy it with a different price. So let's do that. It should revert if the amount of way sent is not equal to the listing price, to the NFT price. So first we need to create an NFT and then list it for sale. So I think that creating an NFT and then listing it for sale is a logic that we will reuse in multiple tests. For example, we will also need this logic in the cancel listing uh, function tests. So let's create a function that does this for us. So let's do create and list NFT. Um, so it's gonna create the NFT. So const token ID equals await create NFT. So let's pass in any token here right here, and then let's do transaction equals await NFT market dot list NFT. So it takes a token ID and a price. So token ID is token ID, and the price, I guess, should come from the parameters, um, number or whatever. And let's await for it to be mined, transaction.wait, and let's return the token ID. Now let's use the function here. So const token ID equals await create and list NFT. So let's do const price equals whatever price we want and pass it to this function. So let's do const transaction equals NFT market.buyNFT, passing in the token ID, and we can send way to with the transaction using value and then how much we want to send in way. And in this case, we want to send something that's different than the price. So let's do 124. And actually, we don't need this variable here. Let's do 123. So the price here is different than the one that the NFT was listed for. And we should expect that transaction to be reverted with this error message. Let's run the tests. And it passed. Actually, I forgot to add an await statement here because these are promises. So the third test would be to check that everything works fine if the price is correct and the NFT exists. So let's do it should transfer ownership to the buyer and send um, the price to the seller. Something like this. So let's create and list an NFT. So let's do const price equals something like this, and const token ID equals await create and list NFT with this price. So let's actually buy the NFT. So const transaction equals NFT Market.connect signers 1 dot buy NFT token ID const receipt equals await, and this should be await 2 await transaction dot wait. So after the transaction has been mined, we need to check for three things. First, 95% of the price was added to the seller balance, and 5% of the price was kept in the contract balance, and NFT ownership was transferred to the buyer. So these are the three things we need to check here. So let's start with the first one. Um, so we're gonna remember how much balance the first signer had after creating the NFT and listing it for sale, and then we're gonna get the new balance of the first signer after um the NFT was bought, and we need to check that the balance was increased by 95% of the price. So let's get the seller balance. So let's call it old seller balance equals um await signers 0 dot get balance. And from previous experience, I know, like, I discovered that after a transaction was mined, we need to wait a little bit before checking the balance of the signer because it's not updated immediately. So we can just wait a little by doing await new promise, set timeout, and let's wait for 100 milliseconds. So here's how it works. This function sends two transactions, right? And those two transactions cost gas fees. So those gas fees will be subtracted from the first signer balance. Okay? So we need to keep track of the balance after those gas fees were subtracted. And if we don't add this line here, the balance won't be updated, and we will have the balance before the gas fees were subtracted. I don't know if this is a bug, but this is the only way I know of how to make this work. Now, we have the old seller balance, we need to get the new seller balance. We again need to wait a little bit before checking the balance. So, because there was another transaction, so we need to wait 100 milliseconds or something, and then check again for the new balance. So let's do new seller balance, and let's get the difference between the two balances. So const diff equals um, new seller balance dot subtract old seller balance, and we need to expect that diff to equal 95% of the price. So let's actually calculate this and store it here. So const seller profit equals price times 95 divided by 100, and we need to floor this. So math that floor, and the fee is gonna be the price minus seller profit, which will be 5% of the price. So we need to expect that the diff is equal to the seller profit. And I forgot to send the way here, so value should be price. Let's run the test. Transfer color is not owner nor approved. So to understand where this bug comes from, we need to understand who calls the transfer from function. So in the listNFT function, we call transfer from message.sender to address this. So who is calling the transfer from? It's always the message.sender. So the one who called listNFT is the one who calls transfer from. And this only works if message.sender is the owner of the NFT. Otherwise, this transfer from function will revert, and that's what just happened here. Transfer caller is not owner nor approved. Because message.sender does not own the NFT, it's the contract, this contract, who owns it. So this contract is the one who should call transfer from, and not the message.sender. And we can do this by calling ERC721, passing in the address of the contract we want to call. And in this case, it's the current contract, so we can do just address this and then call transfer from. This way, we call the function on behalf of this contract and not the message.sender. So let's again run the test. Okay, so the transfer function did not revert, but the test did not pass. Expected 0 to be equal to 116. So, so the difference here is 0, which means that the new seller balance and the old seller balance are the same. So nothing was added to the signer balance. And that's because we're sending money to the message.sender, which is the buyer. Instead, we want to send it to the seller. So let's do listN.seller. So this is a bug we just discovered. Great. So the first expectation is passing. Now the second expectation. So 5% of the price was kept in the contract balance. So we can assume that the contract balance is 0 initially, but let's not do that. Let's get the price, let's get the balance of the contract before anything happens. So we can do const contract balance equals await NFT market dot provider dot get balance NFT market dot address. So this is the initial contract balance. Now we need the new contract balance, so let's copy past these lines. New contract balance, and we do the same thing here. So contract diff or contract balance diff equals new contract balance dot subtract old contract balance or initial contract balance, and we should expect contract balance diff to equal to the 5% fee, this fee. Great, so the test is still passing. Now the last assertion is that the ownership was transferred. So let's do const owner address equals await NFT market dot owner of token ID and expect owner address to equal signer at index1 dot address, signer's address. Great, so everything is working. Now the last thing we need to test is that the NFT transfer event that was emitted has the right parameters. So let's do that. NFT transfer event has the correct arguments. So let's grab the arguments from the receipt. Let's first console.log the receipt, see how it looks like again. So we have an approval, transfer, and NFT transfer. So the NFT transfer is at index 2. So const args equals receipt dot events at index 2 dot args. So let's copy these lines here because we're gonna have the same expectations. So args dot token ID should equal to the token ID. It's the same. Args dot 2 should equal to the NFT market dot, no, it should equal to the signers 1 dot address. The token URI should be the empty string, the price should be 0. Great. And there's one other thing I forgot here. So listNFT, if everything went okay, the ownership of the token should be transferred to the contract, but I did not test this. So let's add this assertion. Ownership should be transferred to the contract. Const owner address equals await NFT market dot owner of token ID, and we should expect that owner address equals um, NFT market dot address, and this checks for the NFT transfer event. So NFT transfer event should have the right arguments. Let's run the test. Yep. So now the buyNFT function is fully tested.